was the silence. Not the polite lull between courses, but a heavy, suffocating quiet that swallowed the usual family dinner chaos whole. Every eye at the table was suddenly on me. It felt like the air itself had solidified, pressing down, making it impossible to breathe. That's when my sister, Olivia, leaned forward just a touch, a smirk playing on her lips, and her words, sharp as shards of ice, pierced the tension. "You don't belong here, Amelia." Never really have. The world tilted. My own name, Amelia Howard, felt alien in my ears, detached from the person sitting there, frozen at our dining room table in Buffalo, New York. 19 years old, a freshman at UB, and those 6 words just undid everything. For a fleeting second, the clinking of Grandma Maria's antique silverware against the china seemed deafeningly loud again. Then it faded. My mind scrambled, trying to grasp what had just happened, what she had just said, and why. It wasn't a whisper. It was a pronouncement, delivered with all the casual cruelty Olivia had perfected over the years. My heart, a panicked bird, hammered against my ribs, desperate for escape, longing for the quiet solitude of my studio apartment near Elmwood, far from this suffocating family drama. A warmth spread through my cheeks, a telltale flush I could do nothing to suppress. My gaze darted around, searching for a lifeline, a denial, anything to dispel the biting truth of her statement. Mom, usually the family peacekeeper, had gone completely still, her hand hovering over a serving dish of mashed potatoes as if frozen mid-motion. Dad, Daniel, just stared into his plate, a familiar pattern of avoidance, a silent agreement to let Olivia's venom poison the air. Even Ethan, my boyfriend, who usually had a witty comeback for everything, seemed to shrink beside me, his knuckles white where he gripped his napkin, his usual easy smile replaced by a worried frown. The sheer public nature of the attack, at a dinner meant for family connection and celebration, added another searing layer of sting. This wasn't a private sibling spat, the kind we'd had 1,000 times behind closed doors. This was an eviction notice, served openly for all our relatives to witness. The injustice of it all, the raw unfairness, ignited a slow burn deep inside, a fire fueled by years of subtle slights and overt criticisms. All the years of feeling slightly out of sync with my family, like a puzzle piece from a different box, suddenly coalesced into that one brutal statement. Olivia had always been the golden child, the one who fit the mold, who effortlessly navigated the unspoken rules of our household, the one who'd gone to the right college, picked the right major. Me? I was the art kid, the one who preferred sketching in my room to socializing, the one who questioned everything, the one whose passion for painting felt like an eccentricity rather than a calling in their eyes. Our paths diverged early, and those differences had always been a quiet source of friction, a low hum beneath the surface of our forced pleasantries. But to hear it articulated so baldly, so dismissively, with such cold conviction, it was a blow that rattled my very foundations, threatening to crumble the fragile sense of self I'd painstakingly built over the past year. A peculiar silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable, a testament to the shock gripping everyone present. No one spoke up. No one contradicted her. The weight of that unspoken agreement, or perhaps just fear of Olivia's notoriously sharp tongue, was crushing. My throat felt tight, a lump forming that made swallowing impossible, a dry, bitter taste coating my tongue. I just wanted the floor to open up and swallow me whole, to disappear from that room, from that moment, to vanish into the Buffalo night. The humiliation was a physical entity, crawling up my neck, settling heavy on my shoulders, making my skin prickle with a mixture of shame and fury. It was the kind of moment that imprints itself, the kind that replays in my head on loop when I'm trying to fall asleep, a constant echo of inadequacy. Every single relative, from Aunt Carol to Cousin Mark, seemed to hold their breath, eyes darting between Olivia and me, caught in the crossfire of a deeply personal war. Just as the silence threatened to suffocate me entirely, a deep voice broke through the air. It wasn't loud, but it carried an undeniable authority, a resonance that commanded attention, a voice that had seen and commanded much more than just a tense family dinner. The source was the Colonel. He was Dad's old commanding officer from his time in the reserves, a man whose presence at our family dinners was a cherished tradition, a steady fixture, almost like a wise old oak in a field of saplings. He wasn't a blood relative in the strictest sense, but he was family in every sense that mattered, often the only one who truly saw past the surface-level chatter and into the actual hearts of people. His chair scraped back slightly as he began to rise, slowly, deliberately, his movements radiating a quiet power that drew every eye away from Olivia's triumphant smirk. A flicker of something, surprise, relief, crossed my face, a tiny spark of hope in the desolate landscape of my despair. The sheer audacity of Olivia's words, the audacity of the entire situation, had left me speechless, stripped bare, feeling utterly exposed. A part of me, a tiny bruised part, still hoped it was all a bad dream, a terrible nightmare from which I'd soon wake. But the Colonel's rising form, his steady, unwavering gaze fixed on Olivia, confirmed its brutal reality. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The air crackled with unspoken tension, a powder keg waiting for the next spark. And the sting of Olivia's words lingered, a raw, exposed nerve, promising a battle I hadn't prepared for. That commanding voice, resonating with such an unexpected power, shattered the silence. It broke the brittle stillness hanging at the dinner table, a stillness that had me holding my breath. My gaze, locked onto the plate before me, slowly lifted. I recall the shift in the atmosphere, the way the stifling tension eased just enough for me to inhale a shallow breath. Though the immediate pressure lessened, the sting of that moment lingered, a familiar ache deep in my chest. It was a sensation I'd come to understand well, a constant companion through the years. Thinking back, that evening wasn't some isolated incident. It was merely the latest chapter in a long, unspoken narrative. My early recollections of growing up in Buffalo, New York, often feature me as the art kid, the one who preferred sketching in my room to engaging in the boisterous social rituals of our household. There was always a sense of being on the periphery, a silent observer in my own life story. It wasn't an overt rejection, not at first, but a subtle, pervasive detachment. I remember countless afternoons spent lost in sketchbooks, the faint sounds of laughter and conversation drifting up from downstairs, a soundscape that never quite included me. My sister, Olivia, always occupied the spotlight. She possessed an effortless charm, a magnetism that drew people in, parents and peers alike. Her achievements were celebrated with enthusiasm, her interests embraced wholeheartedly. Mine, though, they were tolerated, sometimes even politely acknowledged, but rarely truly understood or championed. One instance sticks out. My 10th birthday. I'd asked for a specific set of charcoal pencils, something I'd been dreaming of for months. Instead, I unwrapped a brightly colored board game, something Olivia had mentioned wanting just the week before. The disappointment was a tiny, sharp shard I quickly tucked away, not meant to be noticed. I managed a smile, a practiced performance I'd perfected even then. Nobody noticed my feigned delight. This dynamic continued, solidifying with each passing year. Our parents seemed to gravitate towards Olivia's vivacity, leaving me to navigate my own orbit. It was an unspoken understanding, a silent agreement that I was different, perhaps too introspective, too quiet. The lack of open conflict made it harder to pinpoint, to articulate the subtle ways I felt marginalized. There were no shouting matches, just a gradual drifting apart, a quiet acceptance that my place in the familial constellation was less central. I learned to find comfort in my solitude, in the worlds I created on paper, because the real one outside my bedroom door often felt just a little too loud, a little too full of expectations I couldn't meet. I remember one autumn afternoon, leaves crunching underfoot on our street. I'd just shown my dad a drawing I was particularly proud of, a detailed landscape of Delaware Park. He'd glanced at it, nodded, and then immediately pivoted to ask Olivia about her soccer practice, his attention wholly diverted. That casual dismissal, the swift shift in focus, hit harder than any harsh remark could have. It conveyed a message clearer than any utterance. My creative pursuits, my passions, held less weight, less significance in their eyes. That brief, unseeing look from him felt like a cold gust of wind, a stark reminder of where I stood. That stillness, the kind that grips a household when something important goes unaddressed, started following me around. I would try to immerse myself in college work, sketching out concepts for my digital art class, but a certain chill seeped into the air. Usually my bedroom provided a sanctuary, a place where I could unfurl my thoughts onto paper without judgment. Lately, however, even that personal space felt different. One afternoon, I was deep into a new piece, an abstract representation of the Buffalo, New York skyline at dusk. I'd stepped away for a moment to grab a snack, leaving my charcoals and sketchpad open on my desk. Upon my return, the scene had subtly shifted. My supplies, which I'd carefully arranged, were now pushed to one side. A small stack of Olivia's textbooks occupying the prime spot where my drawing had been. My artwork lay slightly askew, a faint smudge marring the corner. It wasn't a major act, not a shout or an argument, but the implication hit me like a physical shove. My belongings, my creative outlet, were secondary. Her needs, her space, took precedence. A strange tightness formed in my chest. It wasn't anger, not exactly. More like a profound sense of diminishment. This wasn't the first time something similar had happened. A few weeks prior, my favorite mug, the one with the chipped rim that I always used for my tea, had vanished from the cupboard. I found it later in Olivia's room, repurposed as a pen holder, filled with her brightly colored gel pens. When I asked about it, her response was merely a shrug, an insouciant declaration that she liked it and didn't realize it was mine. A simple oversight, perhaps, but it added to a growing collection of such instances. Each time, I'd rationalize it away. She's busy, she's forgetful, it's just a thing. Yet those casual appropriations chipped away at my sense of belonging. The atmosphere during our evening meals particularly changed. Conversation often revolved around Olivia's academic achievements or her social engagements. My contributions, usually about my art projects or campus events, often met with a polite but distant nod, or sometimes a quick change of subject. It wasn't overtly hostile, but it underscored a subtle disconnect, a feeling that my pursuits were less worthy of discussion. The lack of genuine interest, the almost palpable disengagement when I spoke, started to make me withdraw. I began to speak less, preferring to observe, to listen to the murmur of voices around me, feeling like a guest rather than an integral participant. There were moments I caught Olivia's gaze across the table, a peculiar look in her eyes I couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't hostility, nor concern, but something akin to quiet judgment, a knowing expression that made my stomach clench. It was as if she saw something in me, something I was, or was not, that she found lacking. The meaning remained unsaid, but the weight of that look pressed down upon me. It made me question everything about myself, my choices, my very presence in our home. Sometimes, after one of these silent exchanges, I would retreat to my room, the sanctuary now feeling less secure. I'd stare at the Delaware Park drawing, the one my dad had barely acknowledged. It hung on my wall, a testament to hours of meticulous work, yet it felt like a foreign object. That image, once a source of deep pride, now only amplified the sensation that my contributions, my true self, remained unseen, unvalued. I started to wonder if I truly fit anywhere. I began to consider the unnerving possibility that perhaps, in the grand scheme of things, I didn't belong here. The lingering stillness, that deep-seated unease, started seeping into the very fabric of my days. Mornings used to hold a quiet promise, a fresh start. Now, even the simplest acts, like brewing coffee, felt charged with an invisible current. I'd measure out the grounds, the scent of dark roast momentarily comforting, but then my gaze would drift to the kitchen table. Olivia, my older sister, would typically be scrolling on her phone, a picture of casual engagement. Now, she'd just sip her mug, eyes fixed elsewhere, her posture radiating a subtle, yet unmistakable distance. My breath hitched in my chest. Checking my social media became another minefield. Before, it was a mindless ritual, a way to connect or disconnect. Lately, a gnawing apprehension would grip me before I even unlocked my screen. Would there be a passive-aggressive post I had to decode? A shared meme that somehow, impossibly, felt directed at me. My fingers would hover, reluctant to tap the app icon. Navigating my feed felt less like browsing and more like tiptoeing through a brittle landscape. Our shared living space, once a haven, had transformed. My bedroom, the place where I'd sketch my abstract representations of Buffalo, New York's cityscape, no longer offered genuine solace. The air inside seemed thick, oppressive, as if the unvoiced tension from the rest of the dwelling had crept under my door. Even the familiar creak of the floorboards outside my door would send a jolt of alarm through me. I'd find myself pausing my pencil strokes, listening intently, wondering if Olivia was approaching, if I was about to endure another moment of chilling quiet. Silence had become a cutting instrument. Text messages from Olivia were curt, often just single-word replies. My inquiries about her day or plans for dinner were met with an abruptness that shut down any further exchange. A wall had risen between us, constructed brick by brick from neglected conversations and averted gazes. I desperately wanted to bridge the chasm, to articulate the hollow ache forming inside me, the confusion at this abrupt coldness. Once, as I passed Olivia in the hallway, I attempted to voice my distress. "Hey, can we talk about everything?" I proposed, my voice a little shaky. She merely offered a dismissive shrug, her attention already diverted to her phone screen. "There's nothing to discuss, Emilia," she uttered, her tone flat, devoid of any warmth or concern. Her words were like a physical blow, leaving me gasping for air in the sudden vacuum of her indifference. The dismissal stung, a searing rejection of my very request for connection. Later that evening, after a particularly strained supper, where the clinking of silverware was the loudest sound, I retreated to my room. The Delaware Park drawing, usually a source of comfort, now seemed to mock me with its tranquil beauty. Its quiet presence was a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil churning within me. A profound desolation washed over me, a feeling of being utterly alone in a house full of people. My vision blurred as an uncontrollable tremor ran through my frame. I pressed a hand to my mouth, stifling the sob that threatened to erupt, burying the sound deep in my throat. My eyes, red-rimmed, met my reflection in the dark window pane. The image staring back was unfamiliar, a stranger with hollow eyes, consumed by an invisible anguish. I just deleted a long, unsent message to Olivia, its heartfelt pleas now seeming utterly pointless. That stifling quiet, the one that had become my constant shadow, had a way of amplifying everything else. Even the smallest sounds, like the hum of the refrigerator or the rustle of leaves outside my bedroom window, seemed to carry an exaggerated weight. I found myself hyper-aware of footsteps on the stairs, of muffled voices drifting up from downstairs, always bracing for another moment of that familiar, unsettling stillness. My art supplies, usually a welcome distraction, offered little comfort lately. I'd been trying to lose myself in the sweeping lines of my skyline drawing, but the colors felt dull, the composition flat. One afternoon, the house felt particularly empty, save for the distant clatter of my mother preparing dinner. I was on my way to grab a glass of water from the kitchen, my mind still wrestling with the unfinished skyline piece. As I neared the living area, a hushed conversation caught my ear. My sister, Olivia, was speaking, her tone low and conspiratorial. She was on the phone, her back to me, but her voice carried a distinct edge. "Honestly," Olivia murmured, her voice barely a whisper, "it's getting ridiculous. She just exists here, taking up space." A cold jolt shot through me. My hand paused on the doorknob. Olivia continued, her voice hardening. I mean, who even is she anymore? Always drawing, always in her own head. It's like she's trying to be different, special. But it's just weird, you know? And Dad? He just lets her get away with it. He barely even looks at her art. It's honestly humiliating for the rest of us. The individual on the other end of the line responded, their response indistinct. No, I wish she'd move on. Go somewhere else. She doesn't belong here. Not with us. My breath caught. The blood drained from my face, leaving a peculiar lightheadedness. Those casual, cutting remarks, delivered with such an effortless disdain, landed like physical blows. My sister, my own sibling, was actively undermining me. This wasn't just a misunderstanding or my imagination playing tricks. This was a deliberate, calculated campaign of exclusion. A searing heat spread across my cheeks, then down my neck. Humiliation. Sharp and agonizing, clawed at my throat. I felt exposed, stripped bare, as if every insecurity I'd ever harbored had just been validated by the person who should have been my closest ally. A sickening realization dawned on me. The chilling quiet, the distant glances, the subtle shifts in atmosphere. They weren't just passive reactions. They were orchestrated. Olivia had been actively poisoning the well, planting seeds of doubt and disapproval in the minds of our kin. My mind raced, replaying countless interactions, countless instances where I had sought connection, only to be met with a subtle rebuff or an absent stare. It all clicked into place, each puzzle piece of past slights and perceived indifference slotting together to form a monstrous picture of intentional malice. Disbelief warred with a rising tide of fury. How could someone I shared a childhood with, someone who knew my vulnerabilities, inflict such pain? My identity, which I had always assumed was anchored, however loosely, to this household, began to unravel. The art kid, the one who preferred sketching in my sanctuary to socializing, the one who sought solace in a detailed landscape of Delaware Park. She was being systematically ostracized by her own flesh and blood. An overwhelming urge to scream, to confront, to shatter the fabricated peace that had been maintained at my expense, gripped me, my hands clenched into fists, nails digging into my palms. The betrayal was a festering wound, deep and infected. My perception of my place within the household, of the nature of my relationships, had just shattered into 1,000 jagged fragments. A profound, aching emptiness began to spread inside my chest, a void where trust and affection once resided. My vision blurred, not with tears, but with a raw, blistering rage that threatened to consume me whole. A fundamental break had occurred. Something inside me, something essential, had just fractured. A raw, searing sensation burned beneath my ribs, a stark contrast to the icy dread that had settled upon me moments earlier. My vision blurred, not with tears, but with a sudden, overwhelming clarity. This wasn't just a fleeting discomfort, it marked a profound turning point. The atmosphere around me, usually thick with unspoken rules and expectations, now simply felt like a stage from which I needed to exit. The first thing I did, the instant I could escape the oppressive presence of my relatives, was to head for my sanctuary. Once inside, the door clicked shut with a satisfying finality. Grabbing my phone, a device that often served as a conduit for connection, I instead used it as a tool for severance. Opening a specific social media application, I navigated directly to Olivia's profile. Without a second thought, without a flicker of hesitation, I executed the digital equivalent of turning my back, unfollowing her, then removing her as a friend. It was a small act, almost insignificant in the grand scheme of things, yet it carried the weight of a monumental declaration. A line had been drawn. For days afterward, a subtle shift pervaded my interactions. I found myself more guarded, less inclined to offer up details of my day. If someone asked about my college assignments, I'd offer a vague, non-committal response. When questions arose concerning my artwork, the abstract representation of the Buffalo, New York skyline that had been my current focus, I'd simply state it was coming along. My responses became shields, deflecting intrusive inquiries, protecting the delicate fragments of my piece. This new approach was not born of anger, but of a quiet, determined resolve. I was no longer an open book for casual perusal. One afternoon, while making my way to the kitchen for a glass of water, my mind occupied with thoughts of a new art technique, I noticed Olivia observing me. Her gaze carried an unfamiliar intensity, a mixture of curiosity and something akin to irritation. She had been accustomed to a particular version of me, the one who navigated the house with a certain deference, perhaps even a slight timidity. But now, I moved with a different kind of purpose, my steps more deliberate, my attention focused inward. There was no exchange of words, just that penetrating look from her, acknowledging the subtle shift in my demeanor. The space between us tightened, charged with a nascent tension. My routine began to reshape itself, less about what I did, and more about what I chose not to do. I bypassed the usual routes that might lead to an accidental encounter with certain household members. My meals became solitary affairs, often eaten in my room, accompanied by a podcast or a playlist that drowned out any ambient sounds. I started sketching more, pouring my inner turmoil and newfound strength onto paper, creating new pieces that reflected my changing internal landscape, far removed from the Delaware Park drawing that had previously dominated my thoughts. Each stroke was a whisper of defiance, each completed drawing a small victory. This wasn't about being defiant for the sake of it. It was about reconstructing my own world, brick by solitary brick. That evening, a message popped up on my phone, a text from a relative I rarely spoke to, inquiring about a detail of my weekend plans. It was a seemingly innocent question, yet I instantly perceived the underlying motive, a casual attempt to gather information, to feed the household gossip mill. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. A moment of consideration passed. Then, without a moment's hesitation, I tapped the screen and selected the block contact option. The small, silent action resonated with a profound sense of empowerment. That raw, searing sensation, that abrupt clarity, did not vanish with the setting sun. It lingered, a burning ember within my chest, illuminating corners of my existence I had previously kept cloaked in shadow. The aftermath of that dinner, the one where my sister's sharp words cut with such precision, became a crucible. It forced a reckoning, an unavoidable confrontation with truths I'd politely sidestepped for years. For so long, I had chased a phantom belonging, a place at a table that perhaps was never truly mine. The pronouncement, "You don't belong here," echoed, not as a condemnation, but as a bizarre, liberating echo. A strange peace began to settle, one forged not from reconciliation, but from acceptance of what could not be. The Colonel, bless his unexpected presence, provided a counter-narrative, a moment of staunch support that severed the threads of my perceived isolation. His words, firm and unwavering, demonstrated a kind of kinship that transcended blood. It dawned on me, quite suddenly, that true belonging isn't a gift granted by others. It is an internal construct, built brick by brick from self-affirmation and the embrace of those who see your worth without reservation. My artistic pursuits, once a solitary refuge, transformed into a declaration. That abstract representation of the Buffalo, New York skyline, which had consumed me, now felt like a map of my own emerging independence. Each brushstroke, each line, articulated a growing resolve. I spent more hours in my studio, not hiding, but creating, pouring that newfound understanding of self-worth onto canvas. The Delaware Park landscape, the one my dad had brushed off, no longer held power over my estimation of it. Its beauty remained, untouched by external validation. My perception of it, and of myself, had matured beyond needing anyone else's approval. The silence that had followed me, the one that once felt suffocating, gradually lost its ominous grip. It became a neutral space, a canvas for my own thoughts, rather than a void reflecting unspoken criticisms. I ceased trying to fill it with frantic explanations or attempts to bridge chasms that weren't meant to be crossed. A different kind of interaction emerged with certain relatives. Those who genuinely cared, those who inquired about my life without veiled judgment, found me more open, more authentic. Others, the ones who perpetuated that chilling quiet or delivered pointed remarks, found a polite but firm barrier. This journey, marked by that singular family dinner, shifted my entire trajectory. My responses, once tailored to appease, now carried an unyielding honesty. I learned to distinguish between genuine concern and passive aggression, a skill vital for navigating adulthood. The weight of others' expectations, particularly those of my immediate kin, began to lift. It was a slow, arduous process, shedding layers of ingrained longing for approval, but the liberation gained was profound. What came to light was a fundamental truth. Some familial bonds, while biologically present, are not emotionally sustaining. And that's okay. Recognizing this truth didn't dissolve the pain of the initial rejection, but it transmuted it into wisdom. I understood that my identity, my value, was not contingent on whether I belonged to a particular configuration of individuals, especially one that demanded I shrink myself to fit. My place existed, always had, within myself, and with those who truly saw me. Amelia Howard, a 19-year-old from Buffalo, New York, an artist finding her voice. That understanding allowed me to choose my connections with intention. Recently, my phone chimed, signaling an incoming call. The caller ID displayed a name I recognized, one associated with those lingering silences and the undercurrents of judgment. My heart registered a fleeting flicker of the old apprehension. However, it was swiftly replaced by a serene resolve. I watched the screen, letting it ring. The sound eventually ceased. The call routed to voicemail. A quiet exhale escaped me. This gesture, small yet significant, sealed a chapter. The door wasn't slammed shut, but a boundary, clear and resolute, had been firmly established. My narrative from this point forward would be exclusively my own.